On a freezing winter morning in Montana, a U.S. Marine slammed on his brakes as a tiny German Shepherd puppy ran into the middle of the snow-covered road. The puppy didn't run away. Instead, he kept looking back, as if desperately trying to lead the Marine somewhere. Moments later, Nathan found an elderly widow sitting alone beside a handmade sign that read, "Loving home needed, $8." $8. That was all she was asking for. Nathan couldn't understand why anyone would put a price on a puppy like that, until he heard the reason. And from that moment on, neither of their lives would ever be the same. If you enjoy stories of loyalty, hope, and second chances, please subscribe and help us reach 1,000 subscribers. Your support helps us continue sharing stories that matter. The first heavy snow of December settled quietly over Whitefish, Montana, covering the streets, rooftops, and frozen pines beneath a pale gray sky that promised an even longer winter. Gunnery Sergeant Nathan Cole had always believed that silence revealed more about people than conversation ever could. At 39, he carried himself with the calm confidence of a United States Marine whose discipline had been shaped by years of service rather than words. Standing a little over 6 feet tall, with broad shoulders, neatly cropped dark hair, and a clean-shaven face marked only by a faint scar beneath his left eye, Nathan looked intimidating until someone noticed the quiet patience in his brown eyes. Children waved to him whenever his olive-green pickup rolled through town, and older residents knew they could count on him whenever a snowstorm knocked out power or buried a driveway. He never accepted payment. If anyone insisted, he simply smiled and said, "Help someone else when they need it." That afternoon, Nathan was driving back from St. Matthew's Church after repairing the building's emergency generator before another winter storm arrived. The old heater inside his truck struggled against the freezing air leaking through the weathered door seals. Snowflakes drifted lazily across the windshield, while the radio faded in and out beneath the sound of the engine. Then a blur of amber fur shot across the road. Nathan reacted instantly. His boot slammed the brake pedal, and the pickup slid across the icy pavement before stopping only a few feet from a tiny German Shepherd puppy. The puppy didn't panic. Instead, he stared directly at Nathan. He looked no older than 5 months, with oversized paws, a thick amber and black coat dusted with snow, and one ear still bent forward, while the other stood proudly upright. His eyes held a strange mixture of innocence and confidence, as though he expected people to understand him without barking. The little dog let out 2 short barks, turned, ran toward the town square, then stopped to make sure Nathan was following. Nathan frowned. "You're trying to show me something, aren't you?" The puppy wagged his tail once before trotting ahead again. Curiosity overcame caution. Nathan parked his truck and followed the little dog through the falling snow. The town square was nearly empty. Christmas decorations hung from old street lamps, their colorful lights barely visible beneath the afternoon snowfall. Near the center of the square, beneath a leafless maple tree, sat an elderly woman on a folding chair. She looked painfully small against the endless white landscape. Dorothy Harper was 79 years old. Her silver hair escaped from beneath a knitted wool hat, framing a gentle face lined by time instead of bitterness. Her pale blue eyes carried quiet kindness despite obvious exhaustion, and her hands, thin, weathered, and stiff with arthritis, rested protectively around the puppy's leash. Her faded green winter coat had clearly been repaired more than once, but it was clean, carefully brushed, and buttoned all the way to her neck. Beside her feet rested a handwritten cardboard sign, "Loving home needed, $8." Nathan read it twice. Before he could speak, laughter echoed across the square. 2 young men stood several yards away, each holding a paper coffee cup. One was tall and lean, with blonde hair tucked beneath a designer beanie, while the other had a stockier build and the restless confidence of someone who enjoyed making strangers uncomfortable. The taller one pulled a $5 bill from his wallet and waved it toward the puppy. "I'll give you 5. His friend laughed. "He's not worth 8. The puppy quietly stepped between Dorothy and the two men. His body trembled from the cold, but he never backed away. Dorothy gently rested one hand on his shoulder. "It's all right, Ember," she whispered. Nathan noticed something unusual. The puppy wasn't acting out of fear. He was protecting her. Nathan walked forward. "That's enough." The laughter disappeared. Both young men looked him over, noticing the Marine name tape stitched neatly across his jacket. "We're just joking," one of them muttered. Nathan's voice remained calm. "Then tell your joke somewhere else." Neither man argued. After an awkward glance at each other, they turned and disappeared into the snowy street. Only silence remained. Nathan crouched several feet away from Dorothy, careful not to invade her space. "May I ask you something?" She nodded. "If you're looking for someone to love him," Nathan glanced at the sign, "why charge $8? Dorothy smiled faintly. "Because free is easy." Nathan waited. She looked down at Ember before continuing. "When people receive something for nothing, they often forget what it cost someone else." Snow gathered quietly on the edge of the cardboard sign. $8 won't change my life," she said softly. "But if someone isn't willing to give up $8, she gently scratched behind Ember's ear. How will they give him 10 years of patience? Nathan found himself unable to answer. The little puppy slowly walked toward him, sniffed his gloved hand, then calmly sat beside his boot, as though the decision had already been made. Nathan smiled, despite himself. "So your name is Ember." Dorothy watched the scene with peaceful eyes. "I've seen you around town." Nathan looked up. "You repaired Mrs. Lawson's furnace after the power outage. You cleared snow from the Wilson family's driveway before sunrise. And you fixed the church generator today." Nathan blinked. "You noticed all that?" "I notice kindness," Dorothy replied. She folded her hands together to keep them warm. "I wasn't waiting for someone to buy Ember." Nathan looked from the old woman to the puppy leaning comfortably against his leg. "What were you waiting for?" Dorothy's smile became almost invisible. "I was waiting to see who Ember would choose." For a long moment, neither of them spoke. The wind grew stronger, carrying fresh snow across the empty square. Nathan looked toward the darkening sky. "This storm's getting worse." Dorothy quietly folded the cardboard sign and slipped it into her worn canvas bag. Nathan stood and offered his hand. "Let me drive you home." Dorothy accepted his hand without hesitation. As Ember happily trotted beside them through the deepening snow, Nathan couldn't shake the feeling that the little puppy had changed the course of his day before they had exchanged even a dozen words. Halfway to the truck, Dorothy glanced at Ember, then back at Nathan. In a voice barely louder than the falling snow, she said, "It wasn't me who invited you today, Gunnery Sergeant." Nathan looked at her, puzzled. "What do you mean?" Dorothy's eyes drifted toward the puppy, walking proudly through the snow. "Ember did." Nathan's pickup rolled slowly along the frozen shoreline as dusk settled over Whitefish Lake. Snow continued falling in soft, steady waves, swallowing the sound of the tires until only the engine disturbed the evening silence. The narrow road finally ended at a weathered cedar cabin tucked beneath towering pine trees. Time had faded the wood to a pale gray, and one corner of the front porch leaned slightly under the weight of too many winters. Before Nathan could reach for the door handle, Ember jumped from the truck and bounded through the snow toward the cabin. Halfway there, the little German shepherd stopped, looked back, and wagged his tail impatiently, as though welcoming Nathan into a place that had already become important to him. Nathan stepped inside and immediately felt the cold. The cabin was cleaner than many expensive homes he had visited, yet the air carried almost no warmth. A cast-iron stove stood in the corner, with only a handful of dying embers glowing beneath gray ash. An old furnace rested silently against the wall, untouched by life for days. Frost had formed along the inside edges of 2 windows, and Nathan could see his own breath as he removed his gloves. Dorothy noticed his expression. "It isn't usually this cold," she said softly. Nathan looked toward the furnace. "When did it stop working?" "3 weeks ago." "You never called anyone?" Dorothy smiled with the quiet dignity he was beginning to recognize. "I could only afford one thing." She opened a small kitchen cabinet and placed 2 orange prescription bottles beside a nearly empty bag of dog food. "I chose these." Nathan said nothing. He had met people who complained while living comfortably, and others who suffered without asking for help. Dorothy clearly belonged to the second group. She busied herself filling a kettle with water. "I can make tea." Nathan walked toward the furnace. "And I'll make heat." He removed the front panel with practiced hands. Years spent repairing military equipment had taught him patience long before they had taught him speed. Dust coated every surface inside the unit. A cracked igniter, a worn belt, and a loose electrical connection explained everything. "This old thing still wants to work," Nathan murmured. Dorothy chuckled. "So do I." The simple joke surprised them both. An hour passed beneath the steady rhythm of tools against old metal. Ember refused to stay out of the way. Every few minutes, the puppy proudly carried another screwdriver or wrench in his mouth, often delivering the wrong one, but always looking impossibly pleased with himself. Nathan laughed more during that hour than he had in weeks. When the furnace finally coughed to life, warm air drifted slowly through the cabin. Dorothy closed her eyes. For a long moment, she simply stood there, letting the warmth settle across her face. "I almost forgot what this feels like," she whispered. Nathan wiped grease from his hands. "You'll remember now." She looked at him. "You repaired more than a furnace today." Nathan quietly changed the subject. "Where do you keep your firewood?" The next morning, he returned before sunrise with the back of his truck stacked high with split logs. He cleared the snow from the front steps before Dorothy even opened her curtains. Ember burst through the front door, carrying one of Nathan's work gloves before proudly dropping it at his boots. Then the puppy grabbed a piece of kindling nearly as long as his body and struggled determinedly toward the porch. Nathan lifted the log with one hand while scratching behind Ember's ears with the other. "I think you're trying too hard." Ember barked once, as if disagreeing. The routine repeated itself every day. Nathan stopped by before reporting for duty. Dorothy insisted on making coffee, no matter how early he arrived. Ember waited by the gate every morning, watching the road until the familiar pickup appeared through the falling snow. Little by little, the cabin changed. Nathan replaced loose porch boards before someone could trip. He repaired a leaking section of roof, sealed drafts around the windows, straightened a leaning fence post, and reinforced the woodshed before another storm could collapse it. Dorothy protested every repair. "You've already done enough." Nathan always answered the same way. "Not yet." One afternoon, while replacing damaged roof shingles, Nathan climbed into the attic to inspect the supporting beams. Instead of forgotten junk, he found carefully stacked wooden boxes tied with faded blue ribbon. Every box had been labeled in Dorothy's neat handwriting. Christmas, school, church, families. Curiosity overcame hesitation. Nathan opened the nearest lid. Inside were dozens of Christmas cards. The next box held handwritten letters. Another contained photographs stretching back decades. Children standing beside decorated trees, young couples on wedding days, graduates wearing caps and gowns. Every picture included smiling faces surrounding Dorothy. He slowly opened another bundle. One letter read, "Thank you for making sure I never went hungry after my father died." Another said, "You were the first person who told me I could become a nurse." Nathan stopped reading. There were too many, far too many for coincidence. He carried one small box downstairs. Dorothy looked at it and smiled. "I wondered when you'd find those. You've helped a lot of people." "I cooked meals." "You did more than that." She lowered her eyes. "I only did what someone once did for me." Nathan carefully returned the letters to the box. As he reached for the last bundle, something different caught his attention. A single cream-colored envelope rested beneath the others. Unlike every letter around it, this one had never been opened. Across the front, written in elegant blue ink, were only 2 words: "For Dorothy." He carried it downstairs without saying anything. The moment Dorothy saw the envelope, the warmth left her expression. "You found it." Nathan gently placed it on the table. "You've never opened it?" "No." "Why?" She remained silent for several seconds, while snow tapped softly against the kitchen window. Finally, she spoke. "Some memories survive because we never ask them another question." Nathan waited. She wrapped both hands around her coffee mug. "I'm afraid that if I open it, I'll discover someone I loved forgot me a long time ago." The room fell quiet. Ember walked over and rested his head against Dorothy's knee, sensing a sadness he could not possibly understand. Nathan slowly pushed the envelope back toward her. "You don't have to open it today." Dorothy looked relieved. "Thank you." Nathan nodded, but as he glanced once more toward the attic filled with hundreds of grateful letters, one thought refused to leave him. If Dorothy had once changed so many lives, how had the world allowed her to grow old alone? Outside, snow continued falling over the silent lake, while the unopened envelope remained untouched between them, waiting for the day someone would finally have the courage to read it. A fresh layer of snow covered Whitefish the following Sunday morning, softening every rooftop and pine branch until the entire lakeshore looked untouched by time. Warm light spilled from Dorothy Harper's cabin onto the snow-covered porch, while thin smoke curled steadily from the repaired chimney. Inside, the old house no longer felt forgotten. The furnace hummed quietly in the background, a kettle whistled gently on the stove, and Ember, now stronger and more confident than the frightened puppy Nathan had first met in the town square, rested beside the front door with his ears perked toward every sound outside. Though only 5 months old, the young German shepherd already carried himself with unusual awareness. His thick, amber and black coat had grown fuller during the long winter, and his bright brown eyes seemed to study people before deciding whether to trust them. Nathan had noticed that Ember rarely barked without reason. Instead, he watched first, listened second, and acted only when necessary. Nathan arrived carrying another wooden box from Dorothy's attic. "I thought we'd sort through another few letters today," he said. Dorothy smiled as she adjusted the wool blanket over her knees. "I don't think they're waiting for me anymore." "They might be." She looked toward the frozen lake beyond the window. "Or perhaps they're waiting for someone brave enough to remind them." Nathan carefully untied another faded ribbon. Inside lay dozens of handwritten Christmas cards, graduation photographs, church newsletters, and thank you notes spanning nearly 40 years. Many contained old addresses, but several still listed telephone numbers. One by one, Nathan wrote them into his notebook. His first stop that afternoon was the Whitefish Fire Department. The man who greeted him was Daniel Brooks, 52 years old, broad-shouldered with weathered hands, neatly trimmed brown hair beginning to gray around the temples, and a faded burn scar running across his left forearm. Years of rushing into burning homes had made Daniel fearless in emergencies, but unusually gentle during ordinary conversations. Losing his father while still in high school had forced him to grow up quickly, and he never forgot the strangers who had quietly helped him survive those difficult years. Nathan handed him an old photograph. Daniel stared at it in disbelief. "I haven't seen this since I was 19. He slowly smiled. "Mrs. Harper." His voice almost disappeared. Nathan listened as Daniel explained that every Monday morning for nearly 3 years, someone had anonymously paid for his breakfast before his volunteer firefighter shift. Only much later did he discover Dorothy had quietly arranged it with the diner owner, because she knew pride often kept young people from accepting help directly. "I always meant to visit." "You still can," Nathan answered. The next address led him to Whitefish Elementary School. Emily Carter, 34, welcomed him into an empty classroom decorated with children's drawings. She was slender, with chestnut hair woven into a simple braid, warm hazel eyes, and an easy smile that instantly calmed nervous children. After losing her mother during college, Emily had learned that listening often healed more deeply than speaking. When Nathan showed Dorothy's photograph, Emily immediately opened a cabinet. Inside rested a carefully folded blue wool scarf. "I've kept this every winter." She gently pressed it against her hands. "Mrs. Harper sat with me for hours after my mother died. She barely spoke. She just knitted while I cried." Nathan noticed the scarf had been repaired several times. "You never replaced it?" Emily shook her head. "Some things aren't supposed to be replaced." His final visit took him outside town to a cattle ranch buried beneath fresh snow. Samuel Rhodes, 59, towered over Nathan by several inches. His neatly trimmed gray beard, deeply lined face, and rough hands reflected decades of ranch work beneath Montana's unforgiving weather. Quiet by nature, Samuel preferred actions over conversation. But when Nathan mentioned Dorothy, the old rancher immediately removed his hat. "She brought soup." Nathan looked puzzled. "During the blizzard 20 years ago." Samuel nodded toward the distant barn. "We'd been trapped nearly 2 days. Roads were closed, government trucks hadn't arrived." He smiled faintly. "Mrs. Harper somehow did." Nathan returned to the cabin after sunset. Dorothy was waiting with fresh coffee. "You were gone a long time." "So were they." Nathan told her about Daniel, Emily, and Samuel. Dorothy listened silently. Not once did she ask whether they felt guilty, only whether they were healthy, whether they had families, whether life had been kind. By the following weekend, the first knock echoed across the cabin. Daniel stood outside, holding 2 armloads of split firewood. "I figured your woodshed looked lighter than it should." Before Dorothy could answer, Emily appeared behind him, carrying homemade bread and a basket filled with knitted mittens made by her students. 15 minutes later, Samuel arrived in his old pickup with fresh vegetables, flour, and jars of homemade preserves from his ranch. The cabin filled with unfamiliar laughter. Nathan quietly stepped into the kitchen while everyone found seats around the table. Dorothy attempted to stand. "I'm making supper." "No," Nathan said gently. "You're supervising." Everyone laughed. Daniel chopped vegetables with surprising skill. Samuel silently repaired a loose cupboard hinge while waiting for the soup to boil. Emily rolled dough across the old wooden counter, while Dorothy corrected her recipe with playful determination. Ember wandered from person to person, carrying dropped oven mitts, wooden spoons, and even Daniel's gloves whenever they fell to the floor. Every successful delivery earned another smile. Nathan watched from the doorway. For the first time since meeting Dorothy, he realized the cabin no longer sounded empty. After dinner, another knock interrupted the conversation. Nathan opened the door. The same 2 young men from the town square stood awkwardly beneath the porch light. Their heads were lowered. One carried a snow shovel. The other held 2 bags of rock salt. "We came to apologize," the taller one admitted quietly. "We didn't know." Dorothy looked at Nathan. Nathan simply stepped aside. Neither young man offered excuses. They apologized, then spent the next hour clearing every inch of snow from Dorothy's driveway before quietly leaving. Word spread quickly through Whitefish. People began asking Nathan about the little cardboard sign that had started everything. Why $8? He answered exactly as Dorothy once had. A life should never be measured by its price. He paused before finishing. But responsibility always begins with a choice. Those words traveled farther than anyone expected. A grocery store placed a small wooden box beside its register, labeled the $8 Promise, encouraging customers to leave exactly $8 whenever they wished to quietly help someone through the winter. The church youth group collected firewood, dog food, blankets, and winter coats under the same name. No one claimed credit. They simply said it was what Mrs. Harper would have done. Late that evening, after the last visitors had gone home, Nathan found Dorothy sitting quietly beside the window. Snow continued falling across the frozen lake. "They remembered you," he said softly. Dorothy smiled without taking her eyes off the snow. "I never wanted to be remembered." Nathan looked at her. "What did you want?" She reached down and gently rested one hand on Ember's head. "I only hoped kindness would keep traveling after I couldn't." Nathan followed her gaze toward the little German shepherd, sleeping peacefully beside the fireplace. Without knowing why, he suddenly felt that Dorothy had said goodbye to something much larger than the day itself. By the time another winter settled over Whitefish, Montana, nearly a year had passed since Nathan Cole first stopped his truck for a tiny German shepherd standing in the middle of a snow-covered road. The little cabin beside the frozen lake had become the warmest place in town, not because of the repaired furnace, but because laughter had gradually replaced silence. Yet Nathan could also see changes that no amount of kindness could stop. Dorothy Harper, now 80, still welcomed every visitor with the same gentle smile. But her steps had grown shorter, her hands trembled whenever she poured tea, and climbing the 3 porch steps often forced her to pause for breath. Ember, now a healthy young German shepherd with a strong amber and black coat and intelligent brown eyes, rarely left her side. He had matured into an unusually observant dog, sensing every shift in Dorothy's breathing before anyone else noticed. Nathan often caught Ember quietly watching her instead of sleeping, as though he understood something the people around him refused to accept. Nathan continued his morning routine without fail. Before reporting for duty with the Marines, he delivered groceries, checked the furnace, split firewood, and made sure Dorothy had taken her medication. Every visit ended the same way. Dorothy would wave him away with a smile and insist she felt perfectly fine. Nathan always smiled back, but he no longer believed her. Dr. Benjamin Cross had become a familiar face at the cottage. 42 years old, Benjamin carried himself with the calm confidence of an experienced cardiologist. He stood just over 6 feet tall with neatly combed dark hair beginning to gray above his ears, thoughtful brown eyes behind thin rectangular glasses, and a composed face that rarely revealed emotion. Growing up in poverty beside a widowed mother had shaped both his humility and his quiet determination. Unlike many physicians, Benjamin never rushed conversations. He listened first, spoke second, and treated every patient with the dignity he wished his own family had once received. One evening, after another examination, Benjamin walked Nathan to the porch. "The medication is slowing the progression," he said quietly, watching snow drift across the yard. Nathan waited. "But it can't stop it." Nathan lowered his eyes. "How much time?" Benjamin hesitated. "I honestly don't know. Months. Perhaps longer if she's fortunate. But every winter day matters now." Nathan nodded once. Neither man spoke again. 3 weeks later, a heavy snowstorm covered Whitefish before dawn. Nathan arrived carrying fresh bread baked by Emily Carter's students, several bags of groceries, and another bundle of firewood. Something immediately felt wrong. The chimney released no smoke. The porch light remained off. No movement appeared behind the windows. Even Ember was nowhere to be seen. Nathan unlocked the front door with the spare key Dorothy had insisted he keep months earlier. The fire inside the stove had almost died. A half-finished cup of tea sat cold upon the kitchen table. Her coat was missing. "Nathan!" A bark echoed from behind the cabin. Ember burst through the snow, barking repeatedly before running several yards ahead, only to stop and look back. Nathan had learned to trust the young dog's instincts. Without hesitation, he followed. The trail climbed toward an old cemetery overlooking Whitefish Lake. Snow covered nearly every headstone, leaving only names carved into weathered granite visible beneath the white blanket. At the highest point sat Dorothy. She rested alone on a wooden bench before a simple headstone. Harold Harper, beloved husband. One gloved hand rested gently upon the cold stone. She looked over her shoulder and smiled. "I knew Ember would find you." Nathan sat beside her. "You shouldn't have walked up here alone." "I wanted one last conversation." Snowflakes settled softly across her silver hair. "My Harold always hated goodbyes," she whispered. "He used to say that people who truly love each other never leave without promising they'll meet again." Nathan remained silent. Dorothy brushed fresh snow from the headstone. "I don't think I'm afraid anymore." "You still have time." She smiled gently. "I know." Her eyes drifted across the frozen lake. "I simply didn't want my goodbye to become a surprise." The walk back proved difficult. Dorothy stopped several times to catch her breath, despite leaning heavily on Nathan's arm. Benjamin admitted her directly to the hospital that afternoon. The room overlooked the same lake Dorothy had watched for decades. Machines quietly measured the rhythm of a heart that had spent a lifetime caring for others. Late that evening, Dorothy looked toward Nathan. "There's something in the attic." Nathan immediately understood. "The letter." She nodded. "I think it's ready." Nathan returned to the cottage and carefully retrieved the cream-colored envelope from the wooden keepsake box. The paper had yellowed with age, but the handwriting remained clear. "For Mrs. Harper, please read this someday." Benjamin happened to enter the room just as Nathan unfolded the letter. Nathan began reading aloud. "Dear Mrs. Harper, if you're reading this, it means I finally became the doctor you always believed I could be." Benjamin froze. Nathan looked up in confusion before continuing. "When my mother and I were living in our car, I thought school no longer mattered. Every morning you found a way to make breakfast appear without making me feel ashamed. You never called it charity. You called it tomorrow." Benjamin slowly removed his glasses. Tears gathered silently in his eyes. Nathan continued. "You once told me that someone would someday need my hands more than I needed my fear. I carried those words through every examination, every failure, and every victory. If our paths ever cross again, I hope I can finally thank you." Silence filled the room. Benjamin whispered, "I wrote that letter during my final year of medical school." Dorothy smiled with quiet satisfaction. "I knew you would become exactly the man you needed to be." From that day forward, Benjamin personally supervised every aspect of Dorothy's treatment. He adjusted his schedule whenever possible, reviewed every test himself, and often remained after visiting hours simply talking with her about ordinary memories rather than illness. Several weeks later, Dorothy improved enough to return home. Before Nathan helped her into his truck, she removed a small cream-colored envelope from her coat pocket. "Keep this." Nathan opened it. Inside rested exactly 8 $1 bills. He looked at her in confusion. Dorothy gently stroked Ember's head. "If one day Ember has only you—" She paused, gathering another breath. "Don't give him away for free." Nathan frowned. "I don't understand." She smiled. "Give these $8 to the first person willing to keep a promise instead of making a purchase." Nathan carefully folded the envelope and slipped it inside his jacket. As Ember quietly rested his head against Dorothy's knee, Nathan realized she was no longer preparing for tomorrow. She was preparing the people she loved for the day she would no longer be there to guide them. Dorothy Harper lived almost one more year after leaving the hospital, and Whitefish gave her the gentlest winter anyone could have asked for. Snow still came hard across the lake, bending pine branches and burying fence rails, but her cabin no longer stood silent against it. Every morning, Gunnery Sergeant Nathan Cole arrived before sunrise with firewood, groceries, or some excuse about checking the furnace, even when everyone knew the old machine was running perfectly. Dr. Benjamin Cross visited every few weeks with his black medical bag and calm smile, adjusting Dorothy's medication while pretending not to notice the way she studied each sunrise, as if memorizing it. Daniel Brooks, Emily Carter, Samuel Rhodes, Caleb, Mason, and dozens of others took turns clearing snow, fixing porch boards, bringing soup, and sitting with her long enough for the house to remember laughter. Dorothy never became strong again, not truly, but she became peaceful. Her hands trembled when she lifted a teacup, and some afternoons she slept through entire conversations. Yet whenever Ember rested his head on her lap, her fingers always found the strength to stroke the amber fur between his ears. Ember grew beside her during that final year. The awkward puppy Nathan had once found in the road became a lean, powerful young German shepherd with a thick amber and black coat, alert brown eyes, and a discipline that seemed far older than his body. He followed Dorothy from room to room, carried her slippers when she forgot them by the bed, nudged her medicine basket toward Nathan whenever she tried to skip a dose, and slept by her chair every evening. Nathan never said it aloud, but he knew Ember was learning something no training field could teach. The dog was learning patience from a woman who had spent her life giving love away, quietly. Christmas came, with handmade ornaments on the old pine tree, children singing in the living room, and the smell of stew filling every corner of the cabin. Dorothy sat, wrapped in a blue wool blanket, while everyone moved around her. She watched Caleb and Mason hang lights along the porch rail, watched Emily teach a little girl how to knit, watched Benjamin laugh when Daniel burned the biscuits, and finally looked at Nathan with tears resting in her eyes. "I thought love left when people did," she whispered. "But it only changes hands." Nathan did not trust himself to answer. He only reached down and rested one hand on Ember's back. Dorothy passed away near the end of that winter, quietly, before dawn. The fire had burned low, snow tapped softly against the windows, and Ember lay beside her bed with his head beneath her hand. When Nathan arrived, the cabin was still warm, but something in it had changed forever. Benjamin stood in the doorway, eyes red behind his glasses, unable to hide the grief of a doctor who had lost more than a patient. Nathan walked to the bed, bowed his head, and saw that Dorothy's face held no fear. She looked as if she had simply finished one long act of kindness and gone to rest. The funeral was held beneath a gray sky while snow drifted over the old cemetery. Nearly the whole town came. Firefighters stood beside teachers, ranchers beside shopkeepers, children beside elderly neighbors. No one spoke loudly. They did not need to. Every person there carried a piece of Dorothy's life inside their own. After the service, people slowly returned to their cars, but Ember would not move. He lay before Dorothy's grave with his paws pressed into the snow, staring at the stone as if waiting for her voice. Nathan stood for a long time holding the leash. Then he unclipped it, sat beside Ember, and let the snow gather across his shoulders. "She kept her promise to you," he whispered. "Now I'll keep mine." From that day forward, Ember lived with Nathan. Training began slowly, not with commands, but with trust. Nathan never tried to make Ember into another dog. He taught him to track gloves buried beneath snow, to ignore sudden noises, to search by scent instead of sight, and to return calmly when called. Ember learned quickly, but what impressed Nathan most was not speed, it was refusal. Once Ember found a scent, he would not abandon it. Once he understood someone was missing, he searched with a quiet determination that reminded Nathan painfully of Dorothy. Months later, during a regional working dog evaluation, Master Sergeant Daniel Brooks watched Ember complete a difficult search exercise in falling snow. Daniel was 48, a square-jawed Marine with close-cropped dark hair, sharp green eyes, and the hard posture of a man who had spent decades expecting excellence. A scar along his chin gave his face a stern edge, but those who worked under him knew he was fair before he was demanding. After Ember located a hidden training subject beneath a collapsed shed faster than any dog on the field, Daniel knelt beside him and looked up at Nathan. "That dog wasn't only trained," he said. "He was raised with purpose." Ember entered the military working dog evaluation program and passed each stage with steady confidence. He completed obedience work, scent detection, search drills, obstacle courses, and stress tests without losing focus. In time, he joined the Marine Corps K-9 program. Years later, his name became known inside the unit for 3 moments no one forgot. Detecting an explosive device before a convoy reached a mountain road, locating 2 children trapped after a blizzard buried a rural cabin, and finding injured survivors after a mudslide when bad weather forced aircraft to turn back. But Nathan never spoke of Ember's achievements as trophies. To him, every life Ember helped save began long before the training fields, long before the uniformed handlers, long before the praise. It began in Dorothy Harper's little cabin, where an old woman had taught a puppy that love meant staying. When Nathan and Benjamin later cleaned Dorothy's old woodshed, they found hundreds of carefully preserved dog collars hanging along the back wall. Each had a small handwritten tag, a name, a date, and the words, "Found Home." Benjamin wiped his eyes and said Dorothy had spent decades quietly rescuing abandoned dogs, treating them, feeding them, and finding families for them. Ember had been the last. Nathan did not sell the cabin. Together with Benjamin and the town, he turned it into a small shelter and support house for abandoned dogs and struggling families who needed help keeping the animals they loved. Above the living room doorway, he hung the old cardboard sign inside a simple wooden frame. "Loving home, needed, $8. When visitors asked about the price, Nathan always gave the same answer. $8 was never the cost of a dog. It was the price of keeping a promise. And every winter, when snow covered the lake and smoke rose from Dorothy's cabin again, people remembered that the greatest loyalty was not born from command, rank, or training. It began with kindness, grew through love, and lived on because one promise was never broken. Sometimes the greatest miracles are not loud or dramatic. Sometimes God works through a snowy road, a lonely widow, a faithful dog, and one person willing to stop when everyone else keeps walking. Dorothy taught us that love is never measured by money. Nathan showed us that true strength is found in serving quietly. And Ember reminded us that loyalty can become a light for many lives. In our daily lives, we may never know who is silently struggling, waiting for one kind word, one helping hand, or one small promise kept. A simple act of kindness can become the miracle someone has been praying for. If this story touched your heart, please share it with someone who needs hope today. Tell us in the comments where you are watching from, and share a memory of someone whose kindness changed your life. Don't forget to subscribe for more heartfelt stories of courage, loyalty, and quiet miracles. May God bless you and your family with peace, strength, health, and hope.